Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar, The Reality of Project Timelines. My name is Tyler McDaniel. I work with Blueprint Kentucky doing a variety of community engagement, community development projects and initiatives, one of those being the Brownfields Technical Assistance Program. And that this webinar is a component of that program, and broadly, that is a partnership between us and the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet, represented here on this webinar today by Kiersten O'Leary. And through that, we kind of seek to reach more communities through education outreach and amplifying the great work that already happens around the state. Um, and one of those ways is through this webinar series. So if you have not come to one of these before, it is a mixture of things like this, sort of talking about what you can expect or particular program components, as well as case studies and things to draw on from your neighbors around the Commonwealth to hopefully, have someone close by to gain insight from. Apart from this webinar series, we offer some technical assistance work that we aim to make communities a little more competitive in the sort of the federal brownfields process, and doing some community engaged work around that to really help them sort of lead with reuse options that represent sort of the wants and the needs of the people who live in places. So uh, we can connect you to that kind of work and also some of the really great resources that the state offers as far as phase one assessments and loans and other program opportunities. So reach out more directly to myself if you're interested in that, or Kiersten. So the chat is disabled largely for this, but there should be a Q&A section that you can you know, present any questions that you might have that come up, and we will get to those at the end. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time. So at any point, please feel free to throw something in the Q&A that comes to mind for you. So apart from myself, Tyler McDaniel, I mentioned I'm joined here today by Kiersten O'Leary, who works with the Commonwealth of Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet, and Sara Ellis, who works with the City of Louisville. I will let them both do their own intros whenever, we can get to those sections. Um, but for now, let's dig in. Let's dive in. So before I hand it over to my colleagues here to sort of speak on the technical and financial timelines that you might expect, I want to kind of revisit this idea of applications and notifications, and what this process looks like broadly. So, in considering your Brownfields redevelopment timeline, I think it's important to just out of the gate recognize and approach this with the understanding that it's going to be a multi-year process. It's going to take a fairly long time to get all this done. Um, and that begins with pre-planning, of course, that sort of building your brownfields team, doing community engagement, looking at data, developing reuse plans and opportunities, really kind of figuring out what direction you want to go in. And we kind of, recommend like 6 months to a year, if not longer, on that. And that some of these projects can take longer depending on the complexity of the site itself and of ownership and things like that. And the application, whenever the Brownfields application opens, typically comes with a 60-day window, and that's the federal EPA application. Comes with a 60-day window to apply. That window just closed in January, so hopefully we'll see another round of those federally and later this year. But then after that, hopefully notification will come around 5 to 6 months later as far as whether the awards have been given. And then funds will become available 1 to 2 months later. So even from sort of planning to application, you could be looking at almost a 2 year window. And I just want to keep that in mind because it can be a little daunting. And also to name that sometimes these timelines shift and they move, more quickly or a little bit longer, depending on some sort of external factors, as related to, changes in administration or various other kinds of political headwinds or administrative headwinds that we might encounter, and capacity issues as well within this. Particularly with the amounts of money that have been going out the door. So all that being said, to set the stage, I am going to hand it over to Kiersten to get y'all kicked off.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Kiersten O'Leary. I'm the Brownfield Program Coordinator for the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet. And I am going to talk to you today just a little bit about what to expect for technical timelines. Am I able to? There you go. Thank you, Tyler. So the first thing we're going to chat about is environmental site assessments. So if you are planning on applying for an EPA Brownfield cleanup grant, or a loan through either our revolving loan fund program or Sara's at Louisville Metro that she'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes, you will need all of these assessments. So a phase one environmental site assessment, where you have to get that within 180 days of property acquisition. That can be updated for up to 1 year. After that, a new phase one is required. So sometimes we will see that multiple phase ones have to have occurred just to get to the starting point of being eligible for funding. And it is the most important step of your entire brownfield redevelopment process, I would argue. It ensures that you have access to liability protections and funding options for your site. And it has caused pretty significant delays in other projects when it's not completed correctly. Like if it's not within that 180-day window, or sometimes there's multiple property transfers that have to happen in order to be eligible and have that phase one. Some we've run into like a partnership between that have passed a property back and forth, and a phase one is needed every single time. That due diligence step is needed every single time you pass that property back and forth to ensure you have those. So just be very mindful of that. Also, you will need a phase two environmental site assessment and or hazardous building materials survey looking at asbestos and lead-based paint, as well as an analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives, which is basically a document that's written up just talking about the intended reuse of a site and what all the cleanup options are for that. Next slide. So there are lots of ways that you can get an assessment done, an environmental site assessment, any of those that we just talked about. One is through our targeted brownfield assessment program at the state level. EPA Region 4 also has a targeted brownfield assessment program, TBA program. And then there are several active assessment grants in Kentucky in which they can perform assessments for all of your typical eligible entities like local governments, nonprofits, and quasi-governmental agencies, who is primarily who we do assessments on behalf of, but they can also do assessments on behalf of private developers through those assessment grants. So think area development districts, cities, and counties. A lot of those have active assessment grants in Kentucky. And if you're curious who has one or if there's one in your area, feel free to reach out and ask. But for our TBA program specifically, here kind of the breakdown of timelines that we're currently experiencing. I would say it's between 60 and 90 days to produce a phase one environmental site assessment report, and then between 90 and 150 days for a phase two, and then around 60 to 90 days for that ABCA, that analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives. And I won't go through everything on this flow chart, but I just wanted you to have an idea of where some of the hangups might be in this process. So through our program, through our TBA program, we can do assessments both in-house and contract them out to environmental consultants across the state. So ultimately, when an application comes in, we're deciding whether or not we do that in-house or we contract it out. If we're contracting it out, sometimes there are unexpected delays with, it has its own approval process where it has to go to the finance cabinet and be signed off on and send a delivery order to the consultant. So sometimes, there can be delays with that. Also, just wanted to point out that, they're doing a visual inspection, but they're also doing a records review, and they have to have time to write the report. And all of that is true of a phase two as well, except for with a phase two environmental site assessment, there is a little bit more involvement from EPA on our side of things. So that site eligibility determination, or a SED under the phase two, that takes about 30 days to get back, just to make sure that we're spending money on a site that, does qualify for the funding, as well as some additional kind of quality assurance documentation for that sampling analysis plan. Anytime environmental data is being collected, or that sampling is taking place, we have to have that quality assurance documentation approved by EPA. So that process can take up to 60 days. And then one other, thing I wanted to point out is that sometimes samples are being sent to like a third-party lab. So if there's a high volume of samples that are being sent to that, that could cause some delays too, just depending on their turnaround time for that analysis. So just, wanted to make you aware of kind of all the steps that it takes to get to a final report when we're talking about these assessments. And then an ABCA utilizes all of those prior assessment reports. It may be that a site has had multiple phase ones and multiple phase twos or hazardous building material surveys. So an ABCA looks at all of those assessment reports and factors in, all of the state regulatory standards and federal standards and the intended reuse of the site to kind of come up with those cost estimates. So I just wanted to, start the conversation. I know that Tyler's going to talk a little bit more about this, but communication with your stakeholders, funders, partners, community about or throughout the assessment and regulatory process can strengthen regulatory alignment. I put in, when we're in the know, when we know what's happening, it's much easier for us to pivot or advocate on your behalf or speed up review times if necessary. So like if the phase one doesn't align with when you're actually going to transact the property, then that might be an instance where we say, okay, we're going to have to hold off on this one for a little bit just to make sure it gives you enough time to purchase the property. Or hey, EPA, we submitted this quality assurance documentation to you, but they need this in order to move forward to the next phase of funding. Could you make this a priority for review? We can have all those conversations, but not if we aren't in the know. So that communication is a really important part of this. Also, just sustaining momentum. I feel like when assessments are actively happening, it's hard for the community. That's not something that's like widely publicized. It may not look like from an outsider's perspective that a lot is happening when the assessments are taking place, but staying in communication and doing those updates is an important part of this process. Also, just positioning the project for the next phase of funding. I feel like if people are aware of the needs of the project, and kind of what's to come, like, hey, this is going to be a housing project or a flood mitigation project, then it's easier for stakeholders and funders that are involved to make the connections kind of in the background of like, oh, while this timeline is happening, it may be a good idea to start looking at this possibility for funding and things like that. And it also just maintains confidence and prevents any concerns that any stakeholders might have about delays or inactivity on the project. So we're going to switch gears just for a second about the 415 program. So as part of our Superfund branch, which is where I work, we have a 415 liability relief program, and it is designed to provide liability protections to purchasers of contaminated or potentially contaminated sites. So just with the goal of a productive reuse of a site that has been abandoned and vacant for a long time. And so at the time of your application for the 415 program, which we're going to have a whole webinar about this next month, I'm sure Tyler will tease the date on that one toward the end of the webinar. But just so you know, the phase one has to be current at the time of the application. So it may be best practice to, when you get that assessment report, go ahead and start working. If you're interested in enrolling in that program, go ahead and be thinking about that and working with your consultant to develop that property management plan, just so that you don't have to go back and repeat the phase one. And just in terms of timeframes, there is a 30-day review for those applications, but if there are deficiencies in that property management plan, that could be extended a little bit. So we will talk a lot about that next month, all of the 415 stuff, but just wanted you to know that has a timing element as well that might need to be considered when you're working on your brownfield redevelopment project. And then this is my last slide. So external factors that affect project schedules. We have seen a lot of this in the last year or so. Administration changes, like Tyler kind of nodded to earlier, and shifts in policy that can affect a lot about your timeline and this process. So grant application timelines, for example, those are typically announced in September and due like the week of Thanksgiving. Because of the government shutdown and administration change and updates of guidance and all these other factors, that was moved this year. And it wasn't like applications weren't due until the end of January. So, I know that other like technical assistance to brownfield providers like NJIT TAB, who is EPA Region 4s, they were affected by that because the university is usually off for like 2 weeks during the holidays. And so they do grant reviews. And so there were just a lot of, unanticipated delays and things like that. Thankfully, what we're hearing is that the announcements for that funding are going to be pretty much unchanged. We're still expecting the end of May, sometime in June, for when those projects are going to be announced. But just know that changes in administration, changes in staffing, all of those can have an impact on funding availability and review timelines. We've seen that too with just the bill funding that has been, around for the last 5 years with brownfields. There were, they've figured out that it's just as much work to manage a $5 million cleanup grant as it is a $500,000 cleanup grant. So they have changed kind of the funding availability to allow for more of those larger grants as opposed to more of the smaller ones. So just keep that in mind. Also, there can be delays with property access and ownership considerations, whether or not the site or the entity is eligible, having access to a property, or if, lots of folks, siblings inherit a piece of property and they have disagreements about how to move forward with having environmental site assessments performed, or, what to do with the property transaction. That can have an effect on your timeline as well. And then one of the bigger things, something that we see quite often, is the discovery of previously unknown contamination. So once you get to the point of assessment or even cleanup, or just managing that contamination in place, if there are unexpected, constituents of concern, like, an underground storage tank or evidence of a release, there may be a need for additional assessment or delineation of that contamination that can take extra time. So just wanted you all to be aware of all of those things, and I will pass it over to Sara to talk about all the funding elements.
Oh, thank you, Kiersten. Thanks for having me, all. My name is Sara Ellis. I'm the Brownfields project manager with Louisville Metro Government. I'm housed in our Office of Planning, and I'm going to talk to you today from the angle of we are a revolving loan fund grant recipient. So we received a revolving loan fund grant from the EPA that we've been revolving for quite some time now, and I'm going to talk to you from that perspective. So I wanted to start out by just giving you a little background on our program. Different programs are going to look different, but this is the way that Metro has been operating and the money that we've received. So we are I think we're one of the older revolving loan fund recipients in the country. We've been doing this since 1997 when we got sort of an initial grant. And then in 2007, we received a larger grant that we've actually been revolving since that time. And I just wanted to throw some numbers on the screen because I felt like it was helpful for me to contextualize the amount of money that's available and sort of the amount of money that you're looking at when you're trying to figure out what is there to help me with this cleanup. I just want to know what I'm working with before I start down that path. So since 2007, we've administered over $2 million in cleanup loans, and we've also done some grants, and those are generally to nonprofit entities. It's a neat program because as we loan out money, that money comes back to us. And when we get repaid loans, as well as interest and fees, that all goes back into our pot of grant money or loan funding. So it's a continuously revolving program, and we can almost always offer you something. So if you are in Jefferson County, remember this, reach out to me. I would love to talk to you about a cleanup loan. If not, Kiersten can speak to you about her program, and there's probably similarities. What I'm going to talk to you about is a little specific to ours, but I think the principles can be applied across most revolving loan funds you might come into contact with. And then just the last thing I wanted to contextualize is, so we've been doing this since 2007. In that time, we've done 4 loans and 3 grants, which I will admit, when I first started, I thought that was a bit of a low number, but I think it's important to understand they're complicated projects, and that's part of why that is the number that we're at, because it's a lot of matchmaking between the right project and the right funding source, but we hope that we can be your match a lot of the time. So I'm going to talk to you a little more about the specifics of what is required when you would like to take a cleanup loan from us in the next few slides. So I wanted to start out with an example of a project that we did a loan on very recently. I think we closed right before the groundbreaking, which was late last year. So what you're looking at on the right-hand side of your screen, that's a picture of the building sort of pre-construction, or well, pre-cleanup, if you will. It was a former paint manufacturing warehouse, and it's going to become housing apartments with some commercial on the bottom floor. But what I really wanted to walk you through was just kind of the overall timeline. And this is just one example. Every project is going to be unique and look a little different. But so we started out, and I think Kiersten mentioned the EPA site eligibility. That's the first part of any project that's going to take money from us. We need to make sure that they're eligible with EPA. So I just put dates on there really just to show you that this one from EPA site eligibility until groundbreaking was about a year. They did have to update their phase 1 during that process because if you remember, Kiersten mentioned that 180-day timeline. They passed that, so they didn't update, and they did their groundbreaking in October. So the cleanup is currently under progress. Everything's tracking on time, and they're thinking that they'll be done in April 2027, and that is just cleanup. After that, they're going to have some additional work from cleanup to getting the building ready, to getting it tenants moved in and actually generating revenue. So I think it's also important to think about with these projects that your cleanup timeline is often going to be a couple years before the project is cash flowing, if you will. So before it's making any money, there's a lot of prep work. And it's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about how am I going to finance this, that it does require enough funding to sort of keep things moving until you're actually seeing dollars coming back in the door from whatever the end use is. So I just wanted to walk through a couple things that made this application loan ready, if you will, and things that we would look for and probably are pretty common for other revolving loan fund lenders. They had all their financing in place for everything but the cleanup. So typically when you're approaching someone for cleanup loan funding, it's gap financing. You've got everything else mostly figured out. Ideally, you know how you're going to pay for it, but you just need a little extra something to get you over the edge. You need some financing that maybe the bank is leery about lending on because they're not familiar with brownfield cleanup. They're not familiar with the great programs that the state can offer for liability protection, but you just need a little extra help. That's where we can come in. We're also looking for, you have a plan for what you're going to do, because if you are taking these loans, the cleanup is great. But we need to understand that you're able to pay back the cleanup loan. And in order to do that, typically you need a project that is going to be bringing in money once the cleanup and the redevelopment is finished. So we want to see the whole picture. We want to see, great, you know how you're going to clean it up, you know how you're going to reuse it. We're also looking for you have an environmental consultant in place. So that's a professional that understands what the cleanup is going to require, and they're going to be with you the entire way throughout the process. Kiersten already talked about phase ones. When you do your cleanup, and typically when you approach us, we want to see that you have a plan in place for how that cleanup is going to be done. That's something that your environmental professional can do, and that's also something that can be charged to loans that we offer, and you can retroactively charge expenses as long as they're eligible. So cleanup expenses, I do have to be clear, you cannot charge assessment expenses to a cleanup loan. EPA is very clear about that. No assessment money is eligible with cleanup loans. But Kiersten again showed you some great resources if you do need that assessment taken care of. And then if you need the cleanup taken care of, that's when you can approach folks like us or other revolving loan fund recipients. And then just a final piece on that, the ABCA or analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives would be another document we're looking for to say, okay, they've looked at what their cleanup options are, they've got a plan in place, they've got an environmental professional who's ready to carry out the work. Let's move forward. So the way I think about the timeline is it is a little bit of moonwalking in that you are looking at projects that are going to span a very long time horizon. And the reason I think moonwalking, at least is helpful to me, is because you're doing a lot of backwards math and you're sort of saying, okay, I want this project to be, we'll call it housing. I would like to do my housing development in this former paint manufacturing facility. And I'm looking at an opening date of, call it 2030. I know that I have like a year's worth of pre-prep work. I know that if I've got most of my funding in place, but I still need that cleanup gap. And that's what I wanted to show you on this slide. And just again, this is an example. It's a little specific to Louisville, but this might be similar for other revolving loan funds. First, we're going to do EPA site eligibility. So does the EPA think that you are a bona fide prospective purchaser? You did your phase one before within 180 days of property transaction, or you have an agreement with the owner of the property and you have a phase one that you can submit to us. The next step, and I think as I've gotten to know other revolving loan funds, I think this is probably similar no matter where you go. We have a board that will do the approval of the loans. So they're not approved at a staff level. They are approved by, we have a quasi-governmental lending arm here at Louisville Metro called METCO. And those are typically folks with a financial background. So what they're doing when they review your loans is they're looking at the finances and they're basically trying to see, will we get paid back if we give you this loan? But the big point I wanted to drive home on this was if you are going before a board, you just have to think about the timing. Because, so we got your site eligibility, great. Next, the application goes to the METCO board. And for that, that means there's some staff review time. And always think staff review time on a best case scenario for us is 3 weeks. But if something is missing, it probably starts the clock over. And the math that you're doing is, okay, I know that the board meets on the fourth Thursday of the month. And I know that staff review takes 3 weeks. So if I submit my complete application package on week 3 and the board is meeting on week 4, I'm bumped to the next month. So it's just a little bit of math, but things to consider if you're on a tight timeline or if you just want to get a sense of how long it's going to take. And then your kind of step 3 is the cleanup pre-planning. And forgive me for all the acronyms. I'm going to walk you through some of them on the next slide, but just know that these are generally requirements that come into play with federal brownfield money. And I have a link on the bottom. I know Tyler's showing out the slides that the EPA put together this great document. It's called Anatomy of Brownfield Redevelopment. It's pretty long, but they did a really nice job kind of walking you through all of the different pieces. So I would encourage you to visit that if you want some more information. Okay, and then I know this is not the prettiest slide, but I do feel like it was functionally very helpful for me to understand. So I talked to you a little bit about the different requirements of we're doing some pre-screening with the EPA. We have our board of directors who have their set meeting dates that do the financial review. Great, you're approved by the EPA. The METCO board feels good about your financials. Let's move you on to the cleanup pieces. So Kiersten mentioned analysis of brownfield cleanup alternative. Those are kind of the next pieces that you would get into once we're saying we feel comfortable with your site eligibility and your financing looks good. Let's get all of the required documents in place. And and I'm not quite ready for this next slide, but when we are ready, I'm gonna walk you through what some of these mean. But I wanted to show you this because I feel like it's helpful to understand that some of the federal requirements can be done at the same time. So you don't necessarily have to go one by one by one once you get past some of these first pieces. And I think I am ready to go to the next slide now. We're going to talk a little bit about I'm sorry, we'll talk about that at the next one. But before we do that, I did want to back up and talk about financing. And this feeds on what Kiersten had mentioned about good communication and good relationships. So an example that I've seen with some of our loans before, and I mentioned to you all, we are gap financing. So typically when you're approaching us, you've got your other financing lined up. But I do have to acknowledge it can be a little tricky with the bank because say you have a lender, you're going to, I don't know, you go into your Stockyards Bank. They're comfortable lending to you for your housing project. They're not going to lend on the environmental cleanup part. That's why you're approaching us. But both our board and Stockyards wants to see that you have the full financing for your project. So the way I've seen this be successful in the past is honestly is good communication and it's explaining to your primary lender, yes, there is a gap in our financing. We are working with Louisville Metro government. Here's their program. They are happy to meet with you. We can all meet together. And that's something that we did on the loan that I showed y'all for that paint manufacturing warehouse. We had calls, gosh, every week, I think, with the primary lender and with our lenders, just to make sure that everyone was on the same page about the loan probably for a couple months leading up to their closing. And it's something that we're happy to do. And I would think any revolving loan fund lender would probably be happy to make sure that your primary lender understands how this all fits and how the financing goes together. Because I have heard it can be a bit of a chicken or an egg situation on, well, you have this stack of funding, but you're missing this, and who's going to approve the loan first? So I think good communication and a thorough understanding of the project and how this all fits together can really help get you there. Okay, so Brownfield math, we've kind of been talking about this, and I promise I will explain what a QAP is right after this, but I just wanted to give you guys a sense of a few of the different components that you can do together. So your quality assurance project plan, again, this is something that's very specific to EPA brownfield cleanup loans. They take about 30 days with up to 60 days for revision. And then Kiersten mentioned the analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives. These two, you can do them together. But just understand that they're both about 30-day review periods, and the ABCA is 30 days for public comment. And then the other sort of piece of math that I would encourage you to add on to this is contractor bidding. And we are going to talk about what that means more specifically in a few slides, but that's also a 30-day period. So as you are sort of thinking through this process, it's a lot of little dates that you can stack together that eventually do add up to probably be about that timeline that Tyler mentioned at the beginning. If you're kind of 6 months to a year, this is how that all adds up together. Okay, so the QAP that I promised I would speak about. These are documents that are very specific to EPA. So what they are is basically it's a blueprint of how your project is going to be managed from a cleanup perspective. They're typically written by an environmental consultant. What I will say, and this is very specific to Louisville Metro, so check with your lender. Louisville Metro writes the QAPs on behalf of our applicant. We have our environmental professional do that because these are only required for EPA loans. So it requires a specific set of expertise, and we do this to cut down on the amount of back and forth between the EPA and the applicant, and EPA has suggested to us that is a way to do that. Everyone may do it differently, but these documents come with a 30-day EPA review period, and then the EPA does have up to 30 days. If they review and they provide comments back to you and you submit, that can start another 30-day clock. So with that brownfield math, just know that it could be about 60 days on this document, but is very important. And this document needs to be approved by EPA before the cleanup can start. However, it's an eligible loan expense if it's something that you are paying for. If you are approaching Metro about a loan, it's something that we budget into all of our loans that we pay for. And then the other piece that I mentioned that I would talk about in more detail is contractor procurement. So you've got most of your stuff ready to go. You've got all your pre-screening done. Your loan is approved. We're feeling good. We're moving forward. You do need to bid out the work for the actual cleanup for the contractor that will be conducting it. EPA requires a 30-day competitive bidding period, and they have a lot of really good guidance about how you can do this so that it is compliant. And I would say this is one that double check twice because if it's done incorrectly, it can cause a lot of delays for you down the road. So double check and use the resources that are available. NJIT, they have our Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. There's a link in the slide. They will review your procurements for you. They're a wonderful resource. It's free. Reach out to them. And then just a few other details on this. EPA does strongly recommend, and I would say if the EPA is recommending it, just do it, that 25% of the total score of the procurement. So you're looking at the, when you put out the procurement, you have factors of what is the experience of this team? What is their capacity? 25% of your score should be pricing, and that's to help get you good competitive bids. And then just a little more on contractor procurement. I would strongly, strongly suggest do not get assistance from contractors who will bid on your solicitation. No samples, don't email, don't talk to them about nothing. Keep it clean. It will make your life easier. It will make the EPA happy. And rely on those technical assistance providers. Rely on NJIT. If you have questions, reach out to them. Do not use a consultant to get help with your contractor procurement, or it can cause delays for you down the road. And then I mentioned that 30 days before, but just again, to go on the brownfield math, it is another piece of the puzzle of your cleanup that you will have to factor in. And then finally, just a couple other pieces of advice from EPA. They do not like to see competition restricted, so you can't ask for firms with brownfield experience per se. You could ask for experience with contaminated property. So just be mindful of the way that you're wording your procurement so that you're not creating a situation where it's excluding certain contractors from the bidding process. And then finally, EPA does ask that you do 6 good faith efforts to disadvantaged businesses. Those are typically your minority, your women-owned businesses, and they have more information on their website about what exactly that looks like, and I have a link in there. So I just direct you to that one for more details. And then that's also something that NGIT can assist you with if you have more questions.
All right, thank you all. That was great. And I'm gonna sort of talk through just some strategies, some examples, some general information about how to kind of maintain momentum within all of this. And those are two tough acts to follow, so I appreciate your grace in this. But hopefully you'll see the way that this all this information kind of stacks and builds upon itself. So back to that piece at the beginning of anticipating all the timelines in this. Um, Before your site work even begins, you're in that ideation phase, thinking about early planning and how that early planning can help you with momentum down the line, can help you sort of anticipate some of these small little timelines. You know, I'm sure through both of those presentations you noticed a lot of talk about 30-day windows, 60-day windows, these seemingly small chunks of time that can add up to be pretty big in the long term. And so here at the beginning, when you're in your early planning stages, as much of that information that you can get as possible, it's going to help you so much as far as anticipating how this is all going to go down. And when you're doing that planning, when you're doing that work, kind of leaning into these key components here that we always preach in this process of gathering a strong project team, local stakeholders, business owners, the folks doing the redevelopment, funders, and utilizing their strengths and trying to build that team around the strengths of people who have maybe gone through this process before or who have experience with regulatory or financial components and can anticipate these things ahead of time with the knowledge that they come into the process with. And when you know it ahead of time, when you know all those pieces, right, you're able to plan for it. It can also help you anticipate delays and not become defeated or derailed when those delays hit, if they hit. So being able to anticipate those delays and have a roadmap for how you move forward or potentially pivot, and being able to communicate that to your different audiences is going to be crucial. And under that idea of communicating to audiences, transparency and explanation is going to go a long way in this process, regardless of if it's your public, um, if it's funders, whoever. It'll show that you have a plan, that you know how to move forward, and you know, you don't have to get in the weeds and do a lot of extra explaining and sort of detail and technical oriented explanation of the process, but to explain and articulate to public audiences at least that there is a snag and it is this sort of generalized idea and understanding. Um, and that also within early planning, we our role in the Brownfields program being to sort of help with the community engagement components, do firmly believe that early engagement can translate into early planning. So you kind of do that piece of team building, of community engagement, of identifying need and site reuse early, doing the engagement for that to inform the planning, and then you have a built-in audience that you can pull from that you can use, that hopefully trusts you and that you can keep building upon that trust to build excitement and move forward. So within all of this, whether it's a grant or some of these other components like ABCAs, QUAPs, there are sections around community need and engagement, and community generally that can be used to sort of plan and anticipate some of these actions. And Sarah mentioned a little bit of the scoring piece in your applications. These components here in this top bullet of community need and engagement and the section that task description, cost estimates, and measuring progress, those are also in the federal application and are pretty hefty together points wise. So when you start thinking about how you're going to be scored on a grant application, actually using some of this planning work at the beginning can actually help increase your score, increase your likelihood to actually unlock funding for your projects. Um, and in the ABCA, considering that a community relations plan must be prepared for each site within the ABCA, and that sort of, it contains multiple things, but that'll kind of outline your availability and opportunity for public comment, how that's all going to go down, the ways you're going to approach it, the avenues you're going to go through, as well as the written responses to those comments, what those might look like, and how you're going to incorporate any changes to the plan. So this is going to kind of outline broadly as an administrative record and sort of a record of how you're going to notify the public. And it's going to encompass multiple documents and reports and can be a thing that whether it's consultants or some of us doing the technical assistance work can provide guidance on. But these plans that are created in tandem can really help you to map everything out. And if you've come to our webinars or one of our workshops before, you've undoubtedly heard us talk about Revitalization Ready Roadmap and probably seen this really great graphic. But once again, encourage you to use these tools. They're hyperlinked here. Resource road mapping, Revitalization Ready. These are really great kind of step-by-step breakdowns, worksheets that'll guide you through the process and help you anticipate timelines, help you anticipate how the different phases of this are all going to roll out. Once again, getting back to that piece of knowing your audience and being able to sort of maintain momentum with different types of audiences. And each one of these audiences are going to want different information probably, but you'll find a lot of crossover, right? But when you do this, when you do communicate, particularly to the public stakeholders, people will be able to see themselves in the process. They'll be able to buy in more. And maintaining public trust is going to be huge for a multitude of reasons that we can get into in a little bit. But while the community may want, sort of those like general updates, they just want to know what's going on, maybe. Your funders are definitely going to want specifics on dates and on costs, as well as project partners who might come into the process later and kind of the bulk of their work might happen later around construction or architectural renderings or some of that kind of stuff, right? So once again, anticipating how this is going to roll out over assessment into cleanup, and then as Sarah mentioned, beyond cleanup, even in that final sort of 2 to 3, potentially plus year stretch, where everything is really starting to come to fruition. And each of these pieces, or each of these audiences, as I mentioned, may have a different place in the timeline, but I do encourage you to communicate with the public, to communicate with your community partners throughout the entirety. And I'm going to share some examples in a little bit of ways that I feel communities have been successful in communicating and continuing to communicate throughout those processes. So, some strategies for momentum. Once again, getting back to that piece that Kiersten mentioned earlier, it's all about communication, no matter what your audience is. And the momentum is progress, momentum is communication, communication is progress. So offer opportunities for input early on, as you're kind of designing what these sites might be, what people might like to see out of them. Um, we're big believers that the most simple questions can yield the most impactful answers, even if it's something like, what is the biggest need that residents have here? What do you wish that was here that isn't? In 10 years, what would it look like for this town, for this area, for this building to be successful and vibrant? Um, you can do events like design charrettes, where, you might have a map and people can say, I would love, a building here or some trees here or benches and sort of using that to get feedback about, hey, maybe this people really value green space and we need green space here. People really want housing on this space, things like that. And of course, in this, y'all know you got to utilize in-person and online strategies to do this. And some of these strategies, as I mentioned earlier, are going to be required to get funding or even buy funding. So get going early, make them count, use them to your advantage. And these pictures on the right are all from various downtown and brownfields events that we've had. I believe the top four are in Wayland, Kentucky, and I think the bottom two are in Manchester. So sort of various examples of community events and the ways that you can combine things like live bands and spaghetti dinners and things like that to bring people out and get them excited about engaging in community. And then at the bottom, giving them, actual input and feedback around sites, using maps, using photos, really helping them sort of design some of these elements. And of course, hit the streets. We all love a good walk, right? So public meetings with Q&A, always great. Table at events and festivals. Go, what are those places and communities that maybe you have a really monumental downtown festival? Maybe your local volunteer fire department is having a fundraiser. You can, just go set up with a table about information or a table trying to, get information about what folks would like to see. But sort of showing up, communicating, once again, thinking creatively about some of these strategies will help you to maintain that momentum with your public audience. And some online strategies, of course. Once again, utilize your partners, project websites, short form videos, infographics, one pagers. But within all this, once again, keep it short. The TLDR, too long didn't read of it. Um, People just want to know what's going on most of the time. And if they want the deep dive, they might come to the public forum, but utilize these online tools to give short little updates and consider that even what may seem like the smallest updates, like something like a zone change, that can be a really impactful, good update to share. And at the same time, if people are not informed about zoning or the zoning process, that can also be an opportunity to for civic education, for civic engagement, to get people more involved and educated in sort of government processes and what all that looks like. Um, and to hopefully, we'll create more sort of engage citizens together. And then on the left here, some of these pictures, I believe the bottom one may also be from Manchester, but this top one, I believe, is from Harlan. And this is sort of an example, a couple examples here of uh, some of those engaged processes that you can do out in your community. So this top one here, sort of an exercise in mobility and walkability. So you could use something like this around your project sites to say like, hey, what are the sidewalks like? How are people going to access this site? And then giving them things with wheels to mimic things like single or families with small children who how might they navigate these spaces? How might people with walkers, how might people in wheelchairs, how can they access these new spots we're trying to develop? And from that, sort of incorporating that into your site redesign, maybe going after additional funding, things like that. This this middle picture here is an exercise we call Chalk and Talk. It's another interactive where you just, you ask a simple question about the space that people are in or the town that they're in and how they like to engage with it. Um, but thinking about utilizing a multitude of strategies just to be out, to be seen, to be engaged. And once again, that idea that these things happen across multiple years, and really celebrating every small step is going to be huge and crucial and important. And will actually show, that there is work being done because I think a lot of times there is a perception that governments get tons of money or nonprofits get tons of money and then just nothing happens. But a couple examples that I think are really great. This is the an example from the process of moving the city incinerator in Paris, Kentucky. And this road map here, which is also hyperlinked in this where it says Paris, Kentucky Pathway to Progress graphic. You click that, it'll take you to this. It is an interactive map, so each of these nodes you can click for more information. But this shows just how this project has evolved over time, and it's continued to be updated even since I became aware of this 2 years ago in 2023. There's a lot more markers on the path. But this just tells the story of the site itself, of the community, of how they came together to create plans for the site, how they got different types of brownfields funding, different tax incentives, other types of funding. And also, what's really great about this is some of the community plans are actually linked in this document. So if you want to look at those for reference and to say like what could be done, this is a really great resource. Uh, and once again, continuing to update it, lets people know there's still work being done. And if you're like me and you're a visual learner, this is phenomenal. Here's another one to point to the Hayeswood Hospital project in Maysville, Kentucky. This is a pretty robust website. Once again, hyperlinked at the top here. And you can see that this website outlines the project itself. You have documents, which are also the image on the right. You can see this has a lot of info on the EPA and the regulatory pieces of it, but also public hearings, trainings, related links like maps of the area, all kinds of stuff that outlines their process, and also as a sort of a landing for them to keep updating, to keep the community informed, and once again to point to and say like, hey, we are making progress. And speaking of timelines, I think this is a great example of the amount of time that some of these projects can take. This particular building had been vacant for 40 years before Maysville got the Brownfields funding. And they're currently, if I'm remembering correctly, and if I'm not, Kiersten can correct me. They're in sort of nearing the end of cleanup, and then from there we'll begin to actually do that work of architectural renderings, modeling the site, and hopefully beginning construction in the next year or two. But then once again, probably not being finished with that for another 3+ years. So this building, by that point, will have sat vacant for 50 years before it was brought back to life. And I say that not to scare you, but to show you that there is hope even in the buildings that maybe folks think, there is no hope and they need to be torn down or whatever. But that, with perseverance and patience and proper planning, they too can be brought back to life and sort of instill a cultural and community pride. And think about as you move forward this idea of engagement versus outreach. And we really want to strive for engagement with all of our audiences. We want that to be long term. We want it to be based around relationship building. We want the whole community to feel like they're benefiting and that they're connected in this process, not a short term thing that is, very, here is what we're doing, here is how we will benefit. That is it. While there is a marketing element, you can combine that for longer relationship building. And I want to end with this idea that The most successful projects communicate a grand vision. They talk about what the site is going to be. They don't state simply what it could be. Um, and that once again, building your team, outlining your process, anticipating all these components and understanding the timelines and how they work, will be huge. And as you build that vision, if it reflects community needs, if those community needs match the market realities, if you can articulate a vision and dream so big, you can allow the community to dream with you. And I put these two examples here because they've been finished for a while. I guess we consider them legacy projects now that are so deeply embedded in their communities, but they did have Brownfields funding components to them. On the left is the West Six Brewery in Lexington, Kentucky, a neighborhood and community staple around the state. You have probably seen it at a restaurant or at a grocery store. Um, that building, which houses West Six among many other community institutions, originally Brownfield funding. On the right, the heralded Owensboro Riverfront used Brownfield's funding to tear down multiple buildings and to do some cleanup, and is now a centerpiece of their community, of their tourism, of the region. So once again, dream big, articulate that big vision, bring people along with you, and it is possible to transform your place and be a vision for your community, for your region, and for your state. So that's going to mark the end of our presentation, but I am going to stop my screen share. And I see that we have a few questions in the chat here and a few more minutes. So I'm going to throw those out real quick for us to answer. The first question, Sarah, what is the criteria for EPA site eligibility you mentioned for the liminal project?
I'm so glad you asked. So I do want to make sure it's clear. Those site eligibility forms are something that I, as a cooperative agreement recipient of an EPA grant, I'm required to fill out before I spend any of the EPA's money on anything past a phase one. But what they are looking for is the site eligible? Is the borrower eligible? And just very simply, or the simple version of what that is the site on the EPA's national priority list? Like, is it a super fund? It would not be eligible. On the person side, they're looking for, do you have a phase one that's current with or within 180 days of transacting that property? And can you demonstrate you did not cause the contamination on the property? That's what EPA is looking for. And that the onus to fill that out is on us as the recipient, but we do work with our applicants to get that information. So that's a great question. And if you'd like to know more, I'm happy to talk to you about that. So feel free to reach out.
And when I saw that come through, I did look it up online, and it is available online. If you're just curious and want to see Region 4 site eligibility determination checklist, you can check that out.
Second question for Sarah again. Can
Yeah.
you explain who is the primary lender on the liminal project? Always good to know of lenders who aren't afraid of brownfield sites.
Yeah, I'm also so glad you asked. Yes, Stockyards Bank was their primary lender, and we're subordinate to them. And the other thing I would throw out, since you're asking, I believe banks have a requirement through the Community Reinvestment Act. They need to get money out the door to certain projects in certain areas. I believe brownfield funding is Community Reinvestment Act eligible, which means it is advantageous for them to lend on projects of that type. There might be some education needed because I learned this from a lender from Republic Bank actually when we were chatting about, is there more relationship building we can do together? And they mentioned, hey, CRA could be a really nice fit. So also happy to talk more about that if you want to read.
Cool. And then, question for me, any way we can access examples of prior community relations plans to get a better idea of what's often included in them? Um, so I know that there are some guides on the EPA website and on some of the technical assistance provider websites. As far as getting one that has been submitted with an APCA, is that Kiersten or Sarah, do you know the possibility of that?
So I know that NJIT has templates for those. Usually they're called a community involvement plan or a SIP when you're submitting it with this kind of as part of this funding. But they may have examples from folks that, wouldn't mind theirs being shared. Also, like on Frontier Housing's page for the Hayeswood Hospital. It might be worth looking at a couple of those active projects. They may have their community involvement plans posted. But NJIT would be a great resource to reach out to for examples and templates of those.
Awesome. And if you can't find good contact at NJIT, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to connect you. I want to thank all y'all for coming out. I want to thank Kiersten and Sara for building and presenting all this really great information. Our next webinar, as Kiersten alluded to, will be about the 415 process and is on March 19th, I believe. You can check our Blueprint Kentucky website for registration, more information about that, or I will also include that in the follow-up email to this webinar. Thank you all so much. If you have questions for any of us, please reach out. We'll be happy to talk through it. But if not, have a great day and we'll see you on the next one.